Okay, let's start again. Good morning and welcome to the first of 8 sessions in the School of Data Journalism series. This is our first panel discussion. I'm going to hand over to Liliana in a second to introduce the panel. A couple of logistics things before we start. There is another session, the second session in the School of Data Journalism this afternoon, which is the scraping websites and cracking PDFs workshop. We're going to be able to take a couple more people than we envisaged being able to take as part of this workshop. So if you would like to take part, it's going to be first come, first serve on the door. So get there early, and we'll take as many people as we can. If you'd like to tweet about this workshop, you can use the festival hashtag and hashtag #DDJ, Data-Driven Journalism, and we hope you enjoy it. I'm just going to hand over to Liliana to introduce the panel.
And I will hand over to Guido Romeo from Wired Italy, who is our moderator for today.
Thank you Liliana, grazie Liliana. Io parlerò in italiano, i nostri ospiti parleranno in inglese, quindi vi do il tempo di inforcare le cuffiette. Il titolo è abbastanza autoesplicativo. Abbiamo qui al nostro tavolo due generazioni, possiamo dire, di quello che è il data journalism, o che oggi si chiama data journalism, ma che ha degli antenati, ha una storia illustre, risale a Philip Meyer, al giornalismo di precisione. Cercheremo di capire come è cominciato, come si sta evolvendo, che cosa sta ancora portando alla nostra professione e che cosa possiamo fare in Italia. Questa è una parte su cui parlerà soprattutto Elisabetta Tola qui accanto a me. C'è una grossa scommessa in Italia, credo, in questi anni da fare, che sia di formazione e sia di lavoro giornalistico. I presupposti ci sono. Adesso siamo noi che dobbiamo darci da fare. In questo senso l'iniziativa del Centro Europeo e dell'Open Knowledge Foundation è veramente molto benvenuta qui a Perugia, anche perché conoscendo i loro corsi all'estero, le loro iniziative all'estero sono iniziative di altissima qualità. Vedrete poi anche sabato con la presentazione dell'handbook che hanno fatto negli ultimi anni un lavoro fantastico. Passo subito a presentare i nostri ospiti perché non abbiamo tempi supplementari, quindi se finiamo in ritardo, mi hanno detto che, cioè se iniziamo in ritardo dobbiamo finire puntuali, quindi andiamo subito al sodo. Alla mia estrema sinistra Steve Doig, che molti di voi ricorderanno, è premio Pulitzer per il suo lavoro su Katrina, è stato uno dei primi, diciamo, dei padri del data journalism, quando ancora si chiamava computer assisted reporting. Sarah Cohen, che lavora per il Washington Post, ha fatto moltissimo training e ha dato moltissimo alla comunità del data. Simon Rogers, che ormai credo sia una presenza costante, ricorrente e sempre benvenuta al Festival di Giornalismo, perché il suo data blog del Guardian è seguitissimo. Elisabetta Tola, l'ho già menzionata, Formica Blu come agenzia di giornalismo e anche progetto Aref i data per il data journalism, e Aaron Pilofer, last but not least, come si dice, Interactive News Media del New York Times. Non so quanti premi abbia ricevuto e finalmente al festival anche lui. Io passo subito la parola a Steve perché appunto ci racconti come ha cominciato e cosa ancora sta facendo. La sua inchiesta sull'uragano, accennavo prima all'uragano Katrina, ma è un'inchiesta basata sui dati e sulla distruzione e come si comparava la distruzione e la solidità degli immobili. Prego Steve.
Prego. My only Italian, unfortunately. I'm a typical American who speaks only English and is ignorant of so many other things, so I apologize in advance. I'm delighted to be here. I was particularly pleased to be part of a movement to spread the word, the gospel of computer-assisted reporting, precision journalism, data journalism here in Italy. I'm basically speaking first because I'm probably, at least on this panel, among the first to be doing this kind of thing in the United States. I'm literally a graybeard at it. So I'm going to talk a little bit for a couple of minutes about how computer-assisted reporting, data journalism really grew in the United States and then started spreading around the world. It began really with a reporter who at the time was working for the Miami Herald named Phil Meyer, who back in the 1960s when the United States was going through the civil rights era and we were having racial riots in cities, Phil got the idea of doing surveys of people to find out why what was going on with these riots. So Phil started applying social science techniques to journalism back in, again, the 1960s. In 1972, he wrote a book called Precision Journalism, basically trying to spread the idea about using social science techniques in journalism. At the time, it was very difficult for many of his ideas to be done because back then the computers that you would need to analyze data were big mainframe computers, very expensive, difficult to reach, hard to use, and so on. But the sort of microcomputer revolution that started in the late 1970s when the Apple computer came out and then the IBM PC and so on, a handful of reporters around the United States began to play with computers. I mean, that's literally how I see it. I had bought an Atari 800 computer that I played with at home, and at the time I was covering state government in Florida and began to realize I could use this computer to help me do my job better, and that really is sort of the impetus of it all. So I read Precision Journalism, I met Phil, I got very excited about doing things like this, and so I started doing sort of small projects, mostly using spreadsheets. Probably a big keynote event in spreading the idea that investigative reporters ought to be using these techniques was when a young reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution named Bill Dedman won a Pulitzer in 1989 for a project that looked at basically the unfairness in how money was being lent for buying homes. Black residents of Atlanta were being denied loans from banks at much higher rates than white residents, even with the same or even higher incomes. So Dedman's project, called The Color of Money, was really sort of the first Pulitzer Prize that was grounded in the techniques of data journalism. That caught the attention of lots of investigative reporters, and the Investigative Reporters and Editors Organization in the United States began training reporters in how to do these kinds of things. In fact, Sarah Cohen, my fellow Pulitzer winner here, was one of the first training reporters for IRE during this time. Another key event was when Hurricane Andrew hit Miami, where I was, and so I got involved in a big project that looked at the damage patterns from Hurricane Andrew, and we wound up writing a big investigative report called "What Went Wrong," that pointed out that the extent of the damage from the hurricane, it wasn't an act of God, it was really our own stupidity, because we had weakened the building codes and a whole variety of other sort of bad mistakes had been made, which made the disaster much worse than it could have been. You know, basically the computer showed us that counterintuitively, the newer the home, the more likely it was to be destroyed. And that sort of is the idea behind data journalism. You can go beyond anecdote. You know, so many of our stories have been based on just anecdotes, things that we've heard, occasional instances. But to me, the beauty of using a computer is you can actually produce evidence out of the data that can tell you what's going on. So based on those early events, it suddenly began to explode, and today we have people like we have here on this panel that are doing extraordinary things. So I will pass it off to them.
Thanks, Steve. I guess we are going in order of age here. So I'll come in where Steve left off. I started in investigative reporting around the time that The Color of Money came out in the late 80s and early 90s. And what I've always viewed this idea of computer-assisted reporting is a little bit differently. And what you're going to be hearing is, I think, an evolution of the world from reporting or finding stories into the world of presenting them and finding a better way to interact with audiences as we go through time here. But for instance, my work has always looked to other fields, other disciplines, other professions to try to find methods that can provide evidence for us that we can use. So when I was working at the Washington Post in the 2001, we did a major investigation into child deaths in the District of Columbia, in which we found a pattern of official neglect after people had complained that children were in danger. We found that over and over again, the city ignored their pleas, and the city knew that they were ignoring them. That project was a classic methodology of what social scientists call content analysis of documents. The documents were very difficult to get and very difficult to unravel, but in the end, we were able to document the circumstances around about 200 kids' death. But this idea keeps moving forward in reporting of borrowing from other fields. In Steve's and in Phil Meyer's day, it was social science and research methods, surveys, and things like that. But now I think we're moving beyond that and borrowing from even other fields. And one of them, for instance, I think that my work at Duke University now is focused on seeing how historians work with difficult handwritten records, for instance, the kind of records that we get in reporting all the time. And one of the strengths of reporting is that in journalism, we get to borrow from everybody. We let other people invent things, and then we apply them in ways that nobody ever dreamed anybody would ever apply them. So if I can broaden it out a little bit from the social science methodology and into an area in which we are experimenting with all kinds of things. I'll just tell you a little bit about my work at Duke now, because it's kind of looking forward a little bit. And I run a small group called the Reporters Lab at Duke University, in which what we're doing is taking a look at some of these new methods, things like text mining, which has caught the attention of a lot of people in journalism, ways to look at very large collections of documents and find patterns in them. We're starting to experiment with machine learning, where, for instance, if you have a pile of documents and you get to say, hey, this one's interesting, nah, this one isn't. Hey, this one's interesting, nah, this one isn't. And you do that maybe 100 times, it might be able to guess which other 100 you're going to find interesting. So, and the last thing that we're really working on is how to deal with things like audio and video records and how to extract more meaning out of them than we have in the past. All of these things are focused on the reporting end of the journalism spectrum, the discovery of stories and the way of documenting stories. And I think the biggest kind of evolution of this work in the last 5 years is how it has moved from the reporting side and into the presentation side, and how we're learning how to get our audiences more involved in the data that we have, and we're becoming much more transparent about our methods. So, and I think that that's probably the best way to hand it off to Simon.
So. I'll give it to you in a minute. Avete già capito che c'è una prima, diciamo, Steve e Sarah hanno già disegnato, diciamo, le fondamenta di quello che è successo e sta succedendo negli Stati Uniti. C'è una parte di ricerca e di sperimentazione molto consistente. Sarah è stata molto gentile e ci ha definito come giornalisti di persone che prendono in prestito. Io avevo un insegnante di giornalismo che diceva che come giornalisti siamo ladri, cioè andiamo a prendere cose, e in America sono un po' più corretti e le prendono solo in prestito, non le rubano. Però c'è una figura del potremmo dire, oggi si dice hacker, però è un po' questo il concetto, cioè di prendere cose, modificarle e adattarle, sempre con lo spirito giornalistico. La definizione del data journalist, che in Italia è ancora molto vaga, credo debba appoggiarsi su questo concetto di rielaborazione, ma sempre con uno scopo giornalistico. Adesso passiamo, come dire, alla parte, quella che non io ma altri hanno definito la parte giovane, ma io direi la parte che è nata con il cappello del data, non più del car. Simon Rogers del Guardian è forse una delle persone più in vista nella rete, sicuramente citatissima con la sua pubblicazione, e anche credo qualche slide da farci vedere. Please, Simon, over to you.
Good morning, hi. Having done no preparation at all, we were talking just before the session about what we could talk about, and I said I'd show a few things. But so my background, really quickly, is that I used to work on the Guardian website just as a general news reporter. I edited the first kind of iteration of the Guardian news website. And then I went to the news desk of the paper, which then that was the way to go. Right now, it's the opposite direction. Everybody wants to go from the paper to the website, but then everybody wants to get onto the paper. And my first day as a news editor on the paper was September the 10th, 2001. And so I was, there I was, junior reporter. I was either kind of find a way to get involved. And the way I could get involved was by working with the graphics team, because certainly in the UK at that point, graphics and creating graphics wasn't seen as a journalistic process. It was seen as something you just gave to designers. And the problem is the designers would then sit there spending the whole time doing research and stuff and not enough time thinking about how stuff was going to look. So the idea was to have an editor working with them, which ended up being me. And then I found I was kind of collecting data sets and collecting kind of background data, and then we thought, well, we should publish this stuff, and that's how the Data Blog came about. So I guess what we do is we publish data behind the news, we write about it, we write about what we think it says, we kind of analyse it and so on. So for us, I guess CAR is kind of a lot of the stuff we do isn't ever going to win a Pulitzer. It's just kind of daily reporting, and often a lot of stuff we do is that frequency I think is really important for us, that we're always push stuff out which is based on data. So I was going to use examples of how we covered the riots, because that was really showed for us how you can move from something very, very quick and immediate, and a lot of stuff we do is quite quick and dirty at the beginning, through to things that are more sophisticated. And I'll do it in 5 minutes, I promise. This could take half an hour, but I'll do it in 5 minutes. So riots happened last year, and it started off with a kid was shot by the police in Tottenham in North London, and within a day it had spread to other parts of London. The day after that, it had taken the whole city in this kind of crazy thing, and half the police were on holiday, the Prime Minister, the whole government was away, and it went kind of mad, and then it spread around the rest of the country, and then people started getting arrested. So what we had very quick was tons of information being thrown at us. So it's very different to the last time we'd had big riots, which was 1981. This is a picture from 1981 in Brixton, in South London. And then what had happened is you'd had to wait for a judge to sit down and have an inquiry, and then you found out what was going on. And in the meantime, between what had happened and... you haven't got slides there? No,
the slides are going
okay.
So possiamo avere le sue slide perché sono molto interessanti.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's 1981, historic picture. That's when policemen still wore their helmets in London, right? So... And then we had to, like I say, we had to wait for a judge to come back with conclusions. And what you had in the meantime were rumour and political agendas being aired without facts and evidence. And what we have now is no shortage of information, right? So people are bombarded with Twitter and breaking news and rumours, and everything's kind of flying around. And how do you kind of get at the truth of that? And what we found straight away is on the first nights when things were happening, there was a real kind of thirst for just what's happening and how can I trust the information I'm getting. So what we did was we just did something very simple, which was using Google Fusion tables. We created this map, which we just updated all the time. And the thing about Fusion tables is it's very easy. You can just add new rows the whole time. So we had there were about 4 or 5 people in the office, and they were just watching the wires and talking to reporters who were coming back from being out on the street and getting verified incidents. So things we knew with a certain, as much certainty as we could get that had actually happened, as opposed to kind of rumours and things which might have happened. And we published the data behind this as well, so that anybody else could do it and do it better. mash it up with those data sets and so on. And it was really popular. It's probably the most popular thing we did on the site for the whole of August, which is crazy, right? It did about 700,000 page impressions, which for one thing that didn't require a huge amount of effort. It's quite interesting. But then what it gave us was a really good kind of data set of what had happened where, which became really useful for us. And then people started getting arrested. Okay, and as soon as people get arrested, we thought, oh, great, we'll get some proper data. But of course, it takes the wheels of government move very slowly, and you're looking at kind of a month or so before actually finding out. What we wanted to find out were things like, what kinds of people were being arrested, where were they from, were they male or female, what were they being charged with, and were they being treated more severely by the courts? So we got hold of these. This is a court record. And in the UK, these are supposed to be public, open data. But nobody ever asked for these things, right? They're called the court register. At the end of the day, the courts type up what happened to each case that day is. And, so we rang up the courts and we said, we'd like all your court registers, please. Because these are the courts we knew where they were getting riot cases. And they said no. A couple of them tried to charge us. £15 a name they were offering, which, considering about 4,000 people arrested, was going to be quite pricey. Exercise for us. And so we went to the Ministry of Justice and said, this is public data, you should just release it. So they forced the courts, they sent instruction around to the courts to release all this stuff. And suddenly we got kind of swamped with PDFs. And they weren't just the riot cases, they were every case of the day. And so we had to kind of manually go through them and work out which ones were riots and which ones weren't. And the great thing about this data, I know you can still see the slide, is that it has name, people, addresses, ages, what they were charged with, and crucially, what happened to them. So, for instance, we could show straight away that people who were being charged with riot offences were being treated a lot more harshly in court than people who were charged for the same offence but in a kind of non-riot context. Right, so you had like people, there was one guy who stole a packet of chewing gum from a shop and he got remanded to jail, which is very unusual because for magistrates' courts, normally only about 4 or 5% of people get remanded to jail. For these cases, it was 70%. And this reflects exactly what the official stats found out when they came out like a month and a half later. So kind of having access to this stuff meant that we could get stories really, really quickly. So, one of the other things we did, I'm going to speed up a little bit, is we had this data set which showed poverty across the whole of England, which is this amazing kind of data set. It's really badly published by the government, but we kind of extracted it, and we published it in Google Fusion Table. This is just very, very quick and dirty to say, but the red areas are poor and the blue areas are rich and the other areas are in between. And the Prime Minister has said very specifically that the riots were not about poverty. Poverty was nothing to do with the riots. We thought, well, that's interesting. You can say that without any kind of evidence or fact. So let's have a look at it. And so what we took is we took all the incidents which you knew had happened, which were the white dots, and the red dots on there are places that the rioters lived in, which we got from the court records. And remember, the red areas are the poor areas. Anybody see a pattern there? So, and that's Manchester. So, straight away, as soon as the Prime Minister says something, we can kind of say, well, is that true? And examine it properly. And that kind of speed of being able to do things is a new thing, I think. And it might not be the most beautiful thing in the world, but it's very, very useful and quick and actually tells us something. And we got front page stories on probably the first time the words Guardian data ever appeared on the front page of the newspaper. Other stuff we did really quickly, we got 2.6 million riot-related tweets from Twitter, which is brilliant. And this is something we did a couple of things with these. This is the first thing we did, which is very, very quick, which shows the frequency of hashtags. So that first big red one is Tottenham, right, which is where the guy was shot. And you've got the other riots, kind of the orange ones, Enfield and so on. And that big black one at the end is riot cleanup, which was when people went out with brooms and started cleaning up the streets. Which is interesting as well, because Twitter was being blamed for the riots by a lot of politicians saying Twitter had caused it. And what we found actually was that people involved in riots were more likely to have found out what happened on breaking TV news than Twitter, or by BlackBerry Messenger. And BlackBerry Messenger is very easy, right, because people can get a BlackBerry for £10 and it's untraceable. What else did we do? So again, we were inspired very much by Phil Myers stuff in Chicago and thought, Detroit, sorry, and we thought we should go out and interview people. So because we had this database, we had 1,000 people who'd been in courts accused of riot offences. We went and we sent letters out to people, we knocked on doors, we said, would you mind talking to us? And then we got 270 people, which is all right, it's a decent sample. I mean, more than we thought. We thought we might get 50 people, so we were quite pleased with that. And basically, we asked them, why were you involved? What were the causes? Do you think of the riots? Do you think they'll happen again? And it was really, really interesting. Most people thought the riots would happen again. And if you ask people across the whole of the country, do you feel part of British society? 90% or so of people say, yeah. But with the people involved in the riots, only about 20% of people said they felt that. I think we kind of tried to find ways of kind of highlighting why people felt they were involved. And we turned it into a proper kind of academic study, just like Vilmar had done. We worked with the LSE, and we were funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So in conjunction with all the reporting we did, we also had this kind of academic report which came out to, and Paul Lewis, who's on later this week, was really heavily involved with that. So if you see him, it's worth listening to him on it, because he's brilliant. Now, a couple of things we did was, one of the things we're interested in was this idea there was a riot commute, and which was that people were travelling a long way to get to the riot. And part of this came as an issue because people were being threatened with eviction if they travelled from one place to another from their council housing. So we thought, well, that's interesting. How are we going to show that? So we were talking about kind of borrowing technology. So what we did was we went to a transport mapping company, and what ITO World do is they work out the most likely routes people are going to get from A to B. Okay, so they think, if you're going from here to here, this is probably the way you're going to do it. Because we didn't have, how were we going to work that out? What we did have was we had the addresses of where people lived and where people ended up, where they were arrested. So we said to them, well, can you map it? What would it look like? Because we were interested in the idea that, people travel differently to the riots across different places. So this is London, and London is very disparate, right? There are lots of city centres in London. So you can see, you've got South London there, North London. It's very, very different. It's a model. We don't know exactly how people do it, but it's kind of the best way we've got. But in Manchester, very different, because Manchester's got one city centre, and one guy came from 30 miles into the centre of Manchester. People travelled quite a long way. And there you go, that's Manchester. So again, we never, having access to other people that can do this kind of work, and then bringing it together with the data we have, meant that we could do something which was kind of beyond where we were, I think. This is something we did do ourselves, which is Alistair Dan and the interactive team did this project where we're interested in the way rumours spread around Twitter. Well, you know what Mark Twain said about, a lie can be halfway around the world before the truth's got its boots on. And the thing about Twitter is it exacerbates that process, but it also means the truth can catch up. So what this does is this kind of monitored, from those tweets we have, monitored the way that kind of rumours spread around. So green is a rumour kind of expanding, orange is it being queer, and red is people saying it's rubbish. So this one here is the rumour that London Eye was set on fire. Anybody knows, anybody's been on the London Eye will tell you it's made of steel, so unlikely to be set on fire. But and it came around because there'd been a photograph from a New Year's Eve 2 years before, where the fireworks at the base of the London Eye, and that suddenly started going around and said, well, look, the London Eye is on fire. And so you can see how it spread really quickly, and then people coming out saying, actually, that's complete nonsense and not true. Which is really interesting, so far from Twitter kind of, because it might exacerbate a rumour very quickly, but also it can kind of counter them too. Here's another one. This was a rumour that the Children's Hospital in Birmingham was set on fire. Was being attacked by rioters, which again wasn't true. And you see people saying it's true, it's happening, this hospital's being attacked, and then people saying that actually that's bollocks and that's not true. And that's there's amazing work by Alistair and the interactive team there. And another rumour which is on there, which is worth looking at, is that rioters broke into a McDonald's and started cooking their own food, which actually was true. That's it. Just to say that there at the moment the guys are working on stage 2 of the project, which is where we've gone out and interviewed people on the other side of the barricade, so police officers and people in the courts and so on. But and that's going to come out this summer. So what's interesting to me about this whole process is how our kind of data journalism moved from being very, very quick things we had to do quickly to respond to the situation, into being kind of longer term, more thoughtful things. But how we had to respond to stuff very quickly all the same. So we got those court records, and we produced a story from that within a week of the riots ending. And to me, that's kind of, a lot of that urgency is what we're about. It also shows that, what we produce doesn't have to, a lot of the stuff we produce was words and interviews, but it can also be kind of graphics and visualizations that also tell a story in another way. So we're always obsessed with definitions about what is car and so on, but actually, essentially now, I think it's just becoming journalism, and that's perhaps the most important thing.
It's just becoming journalism, sta semplicemente diventando giornalismo, e questo credo che sia un po' il leitmotiv di quello che stiamo sentendo oggi. Grazie Simon, è meraviglioso quello che ci hai fatto vedere, e sta prendendo forma, diciamo, il nostro racconto dalle origini ad oggi del data journalism. È estremamente interessante, puoi vedere come anche loro rubano, anzi prendono in prestito, da altri settori. Mi viene in mente in particolare i social media, cioè i social media sono un territorio, un ecosistema che produce dati in continuazione e sono estremamente interessanti, ci permettono di misurare, di rendere visibili le nostre opinioni e anche i nostri spostamenti, cosa che prima era qualcosa di difficilissimo da mappare, e lo fanno in maniera anche molto economica e molto rapida. Un'altra cosa che vorrei sottolineare dell'intervento di Simon, prima di passare la parola ad Aaron, è l'accesso ai dati che loro hanno chiesto appunto nel caso delle denunce, delle incriminazioni, è uno dei punti cruciali per fare data journalism, fare CAR, fare giornalismo in generale naturalmente, ed è anche uno dei punti più delicati, più deboli forse di questo settore in Italia, come sentiremo più avanti. Aaron, over to you. No.
All right, so yeah, I think to carry on sort of where Simon stopped, my background, I'm Aaron, I'm the interactive editor at the New York Times. I run a team that started about 5.5 years ago out of utter frustration that the vaunted New York Times, where I had arrived about a year earlier as a reporter, had no ability to do a database-driven anything. We had an amazing team of computer system reporting specialists, including, that's what I was, and we were producing this amazing data, but we had no way of getting it out of the newsroom onto the web, which was very, very frustrating. So I think, kind of as Sarah said, the initial motivation for creating the team that I now run, called Interactive News, was presentation, was to be able to take this amazing data and sort of make it available to people, to find ways of creating a narrative online or allowing people to discover their own narrative using data. But I think it's actually changed a little bit since then. So I might actually take issue with the presentation versus reporting dichotomy, but I guess that's maybe for later, maybe for tomorrow's version of this panel. I don't know.
I'll just interrupt and say that I think you're right. It's coming back together.
It's definitely coming back together. So just to give you a sense of how all this started, as I said, it was basically frustration. And so when I started looking to create a team, what I found was that the people that I wanted were not what we might describe as journalists. And in fact, most of the people on my team had no or very little experience with journalism at all. They come from a computer science background or from the technology field, but they are in every respect journalists. So one of the very early projects that we worked on was called the Guantanamo Docket. And I would love to show it to you on this laptop that I brought up here, but the internet is not behaving, so I'll leave it to you to Google that on your own time. What was neat about the Guantanamo Docket was we had a member of the staff who had spreadsheets that she had put together at the time. This was, 5 years ago, when almost nothing was. Oh, wow, this is freaking me out up there. Whoa, whoa. That is really scary, seeing my head that big up there. Oh, man. And it's big enough as it is. So the project started with a member of the staff who had collected painstakingly over the years these incredible spreadsheet of, it's not worth it. Nah. Had painstakingly collected all this information about all of the 779 or so detainees who had gone through Guantanamo Bay. At the time, the Department of Justice, the Defense Department, nobody was telling you even who those people were or why they were there. And so she had done this on her own and collected it and had put it into this incredible spaghetti bowl of spreadsheets, which she understood, which she was able to query and find answers to, which she was able to work with reporters on, but really nobody else understood. Well, one of my folks saw that and immediately recognized, wow, there's more to this. We need to do something with this. And so he worked with her, put together, this is Margot Williams, who was at the Washington Post for years and then with us, worked with her to put together what became the Guantanamo docket, taking this data set that was proprietary, really, to the New York Times, something that we had used to break stories, and turned it into something that was a public-facing web application that anyone can reference. So I don't know what that is. Is that presentation? Is that journalism? Making information available to the public for the good of the public, to tell them about an important issue? I don't know. Maybe you can decide. Another example, in the back there is Dan Wynn, who will be speaking, I think, on this panel, the version of this panel tomorrow, I think, or at least one of these. He worked on a project at ProPublica called Dollars for Docs. What he did to get that data and get it into a format that could even begin to be analyzed was borderline science fiction. Now, was that journalism? Was that presentation? Ultimately, it turned into a web project that, you know, people could go and look up and find out how much pharmaceutical companies were paying individual doctors, and you can decide for yourself whether that's something that they should be doing. I don't know. So I think these two things are really merging together. You're seeing a lot of new skills that are coming into newsrooms across the US for sure, and in the UK, clearly, where, you know, the very definition of who is a journalist, I think, is a bit in question. In terms of the future, where is this all headed? I think Sarah's dead on. I think now that we are seeing an influx of some of these new sort of skill sets, I think that the future is clearly in these areas that computer scientists have been using, these techniques that computer scientists have been using to solve problems, analytical problems for years, machine learning, entity extraction, textual analysis, data mining. And I think some of the work that Sarah's doing, particularly around audio and video, are really, really interesting, and I think that's clearly where we're headed. I would add to those social media. Simon pointed out a couple of projects related to Twitter. The Rumors Interactive, I think, is the single best social media-driven interactive I've ever seen. A lot of people, including the New York Times, have done work trying to turn social media data into something that is meaningful. Almost always, it turns out not to be particularly meaningful because, of course, a slice of Twitter is just a tiny fraction of, you know, everything. Even Facebook, with its whatever 900 million active users, even that is a small self-selected subset of the world, I guess. But the way they built that interactive to tell a story, to say, here is something that was said to have happened, and we can see it in real time actually be presented and then refuted, was incredible. To me, that's where this is all headed, and I really think like engagement is a big piece of this. Is engaging with readers, bringing readers into the reporting process, building tools and platforms. So that's a big piece of what my team is going to be working on in the next year or so. In fact, what I've done is I also run social media and community at the New York Times. And so I've broken off a piece of my technology team to work exclusively on social media related projects, including a platform to do engagement, to bring readers more effectively into the journalism process. And finally, I'll just add one last thing, is tools. Simon talked about Google Fusion tables. Truly, there is almost no excuse these days to not use these tools. They've become ubiquitous. The open source community has delivered brilliantly. It used to be, back in my day, by the way, I am not that young, so I'm not sure how this all happened, just to correct the record. Back in my day, if you couldn't buy a $900 piece of software, you couldn't do serious GIS work. Now there's a free open source piece of software called QGIS, which is available. It's an amazing piece of software. It works. And that's just a small sample. So really it's more a people problem than it is, and a data problem than it is anything else. So I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Aaron. That was perfect. You really framed it with your last words there. Aaron ci ha detto è veramente un problema è stato chiarissimo, non è un problema di tecnologia né di costi, è un problema di persone e quindi di competenze e di dati, di avere i dati, perché ovviamente è su quello che poi si va a lavorare. Elisabetta, sento che hai un grosso peso sulle spalle, perché dopo tutte queste, diciamo, questi precedenti, raccontarci cosa si fa in Italia magari è un po' più difficile, però tu hai cominciato a fare delle cose sulla scuola, hai utilizzato dati Istat, dati MIUR, hai lottato per avere i tuoi dati. Che cosa si fa, cosa si può fare? Aaron ha detto non avete più scuse, quindi vai.
Allora, intanto buongiorno a tutti. Seguendo l'ordine anagrafico, non sono la più giovane a questo tavolo, lo so per certo, ma parlo invece di una creatura che in Italia è ancora in gestazione, che è proprio il giornalismo basato sui dati. Qui una piccola, come dire, premessa: nell'ambito del giornalismo italiano è molto difficile ad oggi vedere qualcosa di prodotto e pubblicato su una testata nazionale, qualcosina di più a volte si trova su testate locali e qualcosa si trova in rete, ma non nelle testate giornalistiche, sui dati. Quindi questo, diciamo, certamente, penso che molti degli italiani presenti in sala lo sappiano, c'è un uso molto creativo del dato nella nostra tradizione, per cui non è infrequente trovare che lo stesso giornalista citi numeri in libertà nell'arco di pochi mesi, dicendo, non so, ci sono 1 milione di studenti che lasciano la scuola ogni anno, e pochi mesi dopo dicendo ce ne sono 100.000. Questo ce l'ho, ho gli articoli, posso provarlo, esatto. Quindi diciamo che c'è un uso del dato sicuramente piuttosto libero. Allora, io vengo da un background scientifico, sono una giornalista scientifica, facevo ricerca prima di darmi al giornalismo. Per me, quando sono stata coinvolta, poi appunto devo anche ringraziare Guido perché ha dato il via al progetto di cui poi vi parlerò brevemente, sul giornalismo data driven in Italia. Tornare, cioè andare, diciamo, a utilizzare i dati per fare informazione è un po' tornare a rivalutare anche il metodo scientifico con il quale ero abituata a lavorare. Quindi per molte cose, diciamo, è un po' la chiusura del cerchio dal mio punto di vista. Questo per dire che la situazione italiana sicuramente in questo momento è tutta aperta. Non voglio appunto continuare con la lamentela, quindi vado sulla parte propositiva, ed è questa. Come Aaron diceva, oggi ci sono molti strumenti. Alcuni sono più sofisticati. Noi non abbiamo nelle nostre redazioni degli sviluppatori che consentano lo sviluppo di strumenti ad hoc, che aiutino il giornalista o che lavorino insieme al giornalista per produrre dei pezzi di data journalism. Molti di noi, io lavoro come freelance, quindi da esterna addirittura alla redazione, in effetti abbiamo anche questa difficoltà aggiuntiva, cioè non abbiamo gruppi di lavoro in cui insieme ci sia la competenza giornalistica, quella, diciamo, di sviluppo, e quella grafica, perché poi c'è il fatto diciamo, di arrivare a una visualizzazione che sia comprensibile e che valorizzi anche la narrazione del dato. Quello che però stiamo cercando di fare è provare a costruire delle cose. Allora, da un lato le cose stanno cambiando in Italia, perché sulla spinta anche del movimento internazionale, di quello che è successo in altri paesi, anche l'Italia sta andando verso una certa apertura, una pubblicazione di dati aperti, e c'è un movimento, guardo Lucy e Liliana qui di fronte, perché un po' sulla spinta anche del movimento internazionale di quello che è stato fatto, anche in Italia c'è una comunità di persone che ha fatto molta pressione a livello delle regioni, dei comuni e poi anche a livello nazionale per arrivare ad avere dei portali open data. L'Istat ha deciso una strategia open data, quindi nell'arco degli ultimi 6 mesi ha pubblicato un sito nuovo e i dati oggi sono molto più reperibili disponibili di quanto non lo fossero in passato, c'è ancora per carità molto da fare, a volte i dati sullo stesso portale, se guardiamo lo stesso tipo di dato pubblicato in due momenti diversi, in due set diversi, non è lo stesso, o meglio non è sempre facilmente immediatamente confrontabile, quindi il lavoro da fare è ancora spesso molto manuale. Però ci sono appunto degli esempi. Allora, più o meno un anno fa, un po' di più di un anno fa, un anno e mezzo fa, la Fondazione Aref ha deciso di finanziare un progetto che si chiama iData, e questo progetto, che è appunto coordinato da Guido Romeo, prevede proprio il tentativo di mappare gli strumenti già disponibili e poi di andare eventualmente a sviluppare nuovi strumenti, secondo una filosofia open source, per i giornalisti che vogliono provare a utilizzare i dati che si stanno rendendo disponibili. Penso che verrà detto qui, ma poi ne riparleremo sicuramente anche in molti altri panel qui a Perugia. In Italia non esiste una legge per, cioè il cosiddetto FOIA, la Freedom of Information Act, quindi l'accesso ai dati non è garantito, non in maniera così trasparente e lineare come in altri paesi. Però appunto c'è questo movimento, quindi anche il governo italiano è arrivato ad avere un portale open data e cominciano ad essere pubblicati i primi dataset. Molto di più si trova in alcune regioni, la regione Piemonte è stata proprio la capofila, quindi alcune cose si trovano. Abbiamo cominciato a lavorare creando anche una piccola comunità, credo ci siano delle persone anche qui in sala che fanno parte di questa, innanzitutto mailing list, gruppo che sta nascendo, che si chiama Data Journalism. Ci sono 150-160 persone più o meno che hanno deciso di entrare in questa community proprio per cercare anche di conciliare, come dire, di confrontare le esperienze. Quindi cominciamo a vedere all'interno di questa community esempi di data journalism. Allora voglio farvi solo due esempi perché sono anche esemplificativi di alcune delle difficoltà che abbiamo. C'è una collega che si chiama Amelia Beltramini che ha pubblicato un articolo sulla pagina web di Focus. Focus, per chi lo conosce, è un magazine, diciamo, di argomenti scientifici in generale, di cultura scientifica, considerato molto popolare, non fa normalmente giornalismo d'inchiesta. Amelia per 2 anni ha cercato di avere i dati dal Ministero della Salute relativi alle performance degli ospedali italiani. Li ha ottenuti, devo dire con grandissima tenacia, e ha scritto un articolo, li ha pubblicati appunto sul sito web di Focus, e chiaramente il limite di questo articolo è proprio la visualizzazione, cioè qui si vede che lei ha lavorato molto da sola. È stata bravissima perché ha prodotto un articolo con tutte queste tabelle, i dati sono tanti e estremamente utili e interessanti. Se avesse avuto dietro di sé anche un gruppo, comunque un team minimo, diciamo, di competenze, probabilmente quell'articolo avrebbe avuto una maggiore valorizzazione, sarebbe anche girato di più. C'è stato un altro giornalista freelance che si chiama Daniele Betteri, credo, Belleri, scusate, che ha prodotto una mappatura, sta producendo una mappatura della scena del crimine a Milano. E si chiama proprio il Giro della Nera. Ecco, lui va tutte le settimane a farsi dare i dati però glieli danno manualmente, addirittura proprio dettandoglieli, cioè non gli danno neppure un pezzo di carta. Questo per dirvi la difficoltà che può avere un reporter italiano, cioè va alla questura, va alle forze dell'ordine, eccetera, dice dimmi cosa avete, cosa è stato riportato, e deve scriversi manualmente lui i dati. Quindi poi ha fatto una mappa utilizzando strumenti naturalmente disponibili e questa mappa viene continuamente aggiornata, però questo è il modo in cui questa persona lavora. Ecco, noi abbiamo lavorato invece dentro iData appunto sulla scuola, proprio un po' per rispondere a una sfida lanciata anche dalla Fondazione Aref, di cercare di capire qual è lo stato reale della scuola italiana. In Italia c'è un alto abbandono scolastico, molti ragazzi lasciano la scuola soprattutto nel primo biennio delle scuole superiori. Quindi c'è un basso tasso, diciamo così, di persone che arrivano al diploma e parliamo di circa il 24% della popolazione italiana che oggi ha tra i 18 e i 24 anni che ha solo il titolo di terza media, un quarto della popolazione. Quindi questo vuol dire che naturalmente in termini di formazione, di prospettive di sviluppo e di competenza futura il Paese perde, diciamo così, una parte importante della propria popolazione giovane. Ecco, siamo andati a vedere come misurare questi dati, veramente a cercare di capire se si possono correlare per esempio agli investimenti, alla distribuzione delle scuole. Il lavoro è ancora in fieri, però sul sito della Fondazione Aref trovate i primi post sul datablog appunto di Aref che cominciano a disegnare la situazione usando i dati del MIUR, usando i dati dell'Istat e poi usando i tool che sono già disponibili. Per esempio per la visualizzazione io non sono un grafico e quindi uso Many Eyes che è già disponibile e che mi consente almeno di fare, diciamo, dei piccoli grafici interattivi, quindi qualcosa che ci porta avanti. Certo c'è ancora moltissimo, moltissimo da fare.
Grazie Elisabetta, thank you Elisabetta. Passo all'inglese perché voglio fare una domanda velocissima per un secondo round molto rapido prima di lasciare voi per le domande, per fare una domanda ai nostri panelists. I'll just switch to English to ask you guys for a quick round. You all told your experiences, saying where you started, what you're doing, and where you're aiming. But one thing has been left to the side, and it's how do you work and how have you been working? We tend to think that journalism is a one-man band enterprise, but data journalism is clearly not. And I think this is crucial if we want to understand how to borrow those different competences, those different know-hows. We had glimpses of this from Simon and from Aaron because they have clearly larger teams, but I would like to go back on this and hear more about it. Thank you.
Well, I'll just mention that even though I work as essentially a lone journalist, in fact, I'm a professor now, though I still do consulting, but I do feel like I'm part of a big team. One of the great advantages that I think certainly investigative reporters have now are organizations like Investigative Reporters and Editors in the United States and a growing number of organizations like that around the world. You know, the European Journalism Center, the things that they're doing to try to spread these kinds of skills is a way of letting all of us essentially be part of a team. So I think this idea that you know, I don't think there's anybody anymore that knows how to do everything that is being done in data journalism. You know, up until maybe the mid-90s, I could say I knew how to do everything that was being done, but it has expanded so much now that I certainly don't, and I don't think anybody does. But we all have access to people who can help you do the things that you don't know how to do.
I'll just kind of mention the size and the scope of the teams that I usually work on. When I was at the Washington Post, most of our investigations, I agree completely that you can't work alone. And just as an example, most of the stories I worked on usually had 3 reporters plus journalists in other departments who were key elements of the team. So the 3 reporters generally included one person who was really well sourced on the subject and probably was the person who came up with the idea, but not necessarily. One person who was a really good writer, and me as a documents and data person. So that's kind of just the beginning of the team. The team was then usually included a journalist from the graphics department who would also be working with interactives on the way out. And sometimes those teams get turned, and I agree with Aaron that this is now becoming kind of moving in the other direction. One of the last projects I worked with at the Post in 2009 after the Obama administration came in was a series of interactives that we developed with the express purpose of publishing information of importance to the public while at the same time building a database for future use that we would be able to use in investigations. And an example of that is something called POTUS Tracker, which is for the President of the United States Tracker, which is a visualization and interactive that we built with our interactive teams, and there were no other reporters than me on that initially, but it then led more recently to some of the stories about some of the stimulus money going to people that President Obama had gone to visit and tout, and now they're bankrupt. So it's kind of moving in the other direction, but I would completely agree that we're now in a world that not only has, as Phil Myers said 30 years ago, the stakes have been raised to be a journalist. We now have to do more, and we're now expected to add more to civic life. But the ability for any one person to work alone, I think, has just gone completely away.
For us, we don't have a kind of a formal structure in a sense, which either is kind of agile or it's cheap. But basically, when I started doing the data stuff that I was doing, I was kind of on my own, really. But then we also there are lots of people kind of in the Guardian who do stuff, which is part of this. So obviously you've got the interactive team, Alistair Dant and his team, who can kind of call on, but they tend to do kind of big, long-term projects. There's a couple of people we can get to help out with kind of short-term things, but and now I have I've got a researcher now, and we've got an investigative reporter who works with us called James Ball, who used to work at WikiLeaks. He's really good. So there are people who can help. But it is that thing you were saying of when you're doing this stuff, kind of in a way the world is your team, because there are other people out there who've got different skills that you need, and that you can go to them, and we do that a lot. So often things like we do with that transport mapping, I'll know there'll be somebody outside who'll have the skills that we need. And what's the point of somebody inside spending ages kind of learning to do something, somebody outside can just do it. And we're often a lot of what we're about now is trying to bring people into our journalism, being open about stuff. And this area is just something that really lends itself to that, because there are so many people out there who know more about stuff than we do.
So, yeah, I mean, we have a very, very large team doing these sorts of things. The graphics desk has, I think, a half a dozen additional people or so just dedicated to digital. There's a full-blown car team. There's another team at the Times called Multimedia. So there's a lot of resources there. But, I mean, the truth of the matter is that doesn't really give you that much. And I know that sounds ridiculous for me to say, but truly most of the projects, almost all of them that we do, are 2, maybe 3-person projects at most. It's very rare. Only a handful of the projects that we do are, full-blown epic 7-person projects. You can do quite a bit with small teams, and even though, so an example of that was on the Iowa caucuses, the first caucus of the election season, John Keefe, who is sort of the me equivalent at WNYC, which is the New York-based public radio station. He does web projects, and he built an election map by himself that beat everybody, because he had the smarts to realize that Google, which was getting the data for the first time through a different source than the source that we were using and virtually everyone else was using, that Google was going to be 15 to 20 minutes ahead of everyone. So one guy at a radio station beat the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, everybody. His map, when we're all looking at that going, great. So it's possible, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You need to find friends, and there are places to do that.
Thank you, Aaron. So it was one guy with Google, so he had the Google team.
One guy with data.
Elisabetta, non hai scuse, insomma, gli strumenti ci sono, i grandi team non servono, dice Aaron, quindi devi trovare gli amici giusti, è questa.
No, infatti stiamo andando in quella direzione anche qui. In effetti si sta creando, diciamo così, una comunità allargata che riunisce un po' i giornalisti, ma anche se giornalisti non in senso formale. Molti di noi non lavorano come giornalisti, sono i cosiddetti citizen journalist, cioè sono persone che hanno interesse a fare informazione, soprattutto sulla loro realtà locale, quindi magari fanno anche altre cose come mestiere, ma in realtà sono molto interessati a lavorare per fare informazione. Ci sono un certo numero di sviluppatori che si stanno appassionando a questo tipo di tema, di argomento, e ci stanno dando una gran mano, cioè, stiamo lavorando insieme, stiamo iniziando a parlare, stiamo anche mutuando ovviamente alcune idee, E abbiamo deciso per esempio di avviare anche in Italia un gruppo che si chiama Hacks and Hackers sulla tradizione americana, lo copiamo proprio tal quale da loro, e cioè queste riunioni informali. Aaron è uno dei fondatori di Hacks Hackers negli Stati Uniti, e lo copiamo proprio nel senso che sono riunioni informali dove sviluppatori, persone interessate, diciamo attivisti a livello locale si riuniscono, giornalisti, quindi persone con diverse competenze, e si aiutano. Quindi stiamo provando a farlo anche qui. Infatti qui a Perugia sabato sera ci sarà il lancio, diciamo, sarà una prima riunione di questo Hacks and Hackers. Continueremo con un gruppo a Bologna, però l'invito è ovviamente a proliferare e a farlo anche nelle altre città. Ci sono gruppi, per esempio, di persone con cui stiamo collaborando. C'è una lista che si chiama Spaghetti Open Data, è un tema molto italiano, ed è anche quella una lista un po' smanettona, dove ci sono molte persone, diciamo, appassionate. Alcune lavorano nelle istituzioni pubbliche, altre fanno altri tipi di mestieri, ma stanno promuovendo molto proprio da un lato la pubblicazione dei dati e dall'altro strumenti per poter lavorare su questi dati. Quindi le cose si stanno muovendo, io credo che sia un ottimo momento. Parallelamente stiamo cercando di fare molta formazione, un po' andiamo noi ai vari corsi in giro per l'Europa e per il mondo a imparare a utilizzare questi strumenti, e un po' stiamo proponendo dei corsi di formazione anche in Italia. Io per esempio insegno un corso di data journalism al Master in Comunicazione Scientifica a Trieste, ed è il primo, credo, corso strutturato a lungo termine. Con la Fondazione Aref faremo la prima data school con Istat, quindi ci sono, diciamo, delle occasioni. Quindi io credo che sia invece un ottimo momento proprio per mettersi in gioco e provare a produrre. La cosa che dobbiamo fare è però anche pubblicare, cioè provare a portarli fuori questi lavori, anche se non sono ancora bellissimi, e a metterli online e farli circolare. Questo, diciamo, sta iniziando, si sta cominciando.
Grazie Elisabetta. Lascio il tempo per le domande a voi. Abbiamo 20 minuti, credo che le suggestioni qui siano state tante, e mi aspetto molte domande, quindi prego. Chi vuole rompere il ghiaccio? So che la prima domanda è la più difficile sempre. C'è un microfono in sala. Ci sono 2 microfoni in sala. You can go for questions. We have 2 mics in the room, so please just raise your hand and don't be shy. You guys really scared them, huh? There you go. You want to stand up?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it works.
If you're from a smaller publication and the journalist doesn't have the technical skills, and you need to reorganize your media organization in order to start working with data journalism, what would be your best advice when it comes to how to do the internal organizations in order to get this going?
Who wants to take this? You want to go?
I think I wouldn't worry too much about trying to get official bits set up. I mean, I get emails like this all the time, people saying we want to set up a data journalism department. But actually, the way that you get the attention of the people that matter in the news organisations, you just start producing stories and start producing stuff, and then people get interested. It's like before WikiLeaks, people just thought, what the hell are they doing? They're just kind of mucking around spreadsheets, and then suddenly you're getting stories out of it. I kind of think actually the most important thing is to not worry too much about structure at the beginning, but just to get things in, and then the rest kind of follows, and then you start to get resources and stuff because people can see its value. So that's what I'd say.
Can I add to that? What you heard, I think, across this whole panel is that everybody up here, I think, got into this work out of frustration, that we were all being told no somehow, and that somehow we decided that wasn't an acceptable answer. And so there is nothing other than stories that we care about. It's a little bit easier to force the issue if you don't have to publish, but the minute you create a visualization inside your newsroom and show it to an editor, they are going to find a way to get it published. So there is a little bit of the guerrilla tactic, I think, involved.
I'll add one thing. There's sort of a mantra among the people who are doing this. It's don't talk, do. Make things. If you make things maybe on your own time, using your own money to get the software if you need that, I think that's how many of us got started. I mean, that certainly was my pattern at the Miami Herald. There wasn't, the job that I wound up having didn't exist really when I started just doing it and then presenting the things that I was making to my boss. They began to value it. But you can't ask an editor who's never seen that kind of thing being done to understand what it is. Present them with things, and that'll give you the resources.
And use that community that Simon's been talking about. My first stories were done by somebody I actually covered at a university, an institute I covered at the university. The guy who ran it played golf every Thursday afternoon, and he let me go use his computer while he was gone that every Thursday afternoon because we didn't have any resources in the newsroom. So kind of use your entire community around you and use the resources that are available there.
Una domanda qui e poi una là in fondo.
How you would see the future of data journalism in, let's say, 5 or 10 years?
Well, I come from the past, and it has amazed me how much it has changed. One of the things I tell my students is whatever we are teaching you right now, you probably won't be using 5 years from now. You'll be using, amazing new tools that will get created by people who may, as Sarah said, be creating those tools for entire different disciplines. The key thing that I think we need to take into this business is the idea that ultimately our goal is finding stories and telling them and being able to recognize tools that are being used by other people that can help us do that. So predicting what's going to be out 5 or 10 years from now is, that's pie in the sky, but guaranteed it will be even more interesting than it is now.
And my hope is that we will be talking less about how difficult the technology is, that the tools will get easier, but the data problems and our fight for information and our fight to make sense of an exploding amount of information, I hope, is what the value that we're going to be adding, and that perhaps we'll have things that are easier to use every year. And I think we have been getting things that are easier to use every year.
I mean, one of the totally agree. On the other side, on the non-tool side, I think you're seeing a change of culture in newsrooms that, you can't, the New York Times has basically become a software shop for all intents and purposes. We've released all kinds of pieces of software open source, and you can't start doing that without thinking differently about how you do your work writ large. And so I would say that data journalism probably will include a lot of folks who you don't think of necessarily right now as journalists. I think it will be a lot more open. I think you will see a lot more of, as Brian Boyer from the Chicago Tribune likes to say, people showing their work, opening up the data, showing sort of as much as they can of the notebook. I think it'll be a lot more collaborative. And like I said, I think we're going to bring a lot of people into newsrooms who right now don't think of themselves as journalists at all.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that cultural change Aaron was saying is really, really significant. So we're seeing loads of kind of younger reporters coming from journalism schools. I had some work experience people in this week, and this guy, who's a journalism student, wrote this brilliant visualization, wrote the code for it using Gephi and stuff, and it's so far beyond my kind of skill level. It was really impressive, and I kind of think that is a really significant thing. And also, it's just going to become so widespread that everybody will be doing it. So even, compared to a year ago, even within the kind of more established reporters, there are more and more people who are doing stuff for themselves, who feel kind of more empowered to do stuff.
Elisabetta, do you want to add something on that? I think we're seeing pretty much the same pattern here in Italy, although on a smaller scale. In fact, I would say that in this very diverse community, we have people that don't want to be called journalists. Journalists is somewhat of a bad thing, quote unquote. So, and I see it as very positive. Of course, there's a huge change of culture to be made there. But maybe the best recommendation is showing your work. Just do the stuff as Sarah and Steve have pointed out. And editors, once they see it and hopefully they like it, they will buy into it. We have one lady at the bottom, la ragazza in fondo che è la prima da tempo.
Nelle Vesti newspaper from Montenegro. I would like to ask you what strategies do you suggest for newsrooms who would like to introduce what you're talking about in terms of educating the staff?
I think we partially answered this with Steve's first answer, but maybe this is more focused on education. Do you guys want to point out training courses? I can point out the training courses from EGC, European Journalism Center. Of course, they're hosting the panel, so it's I'm supposed to do that, but they're really good. And there's an excellent course at the City University in London, where I think you teach as well, Simon, and
Gavin's back in the middle of the audience there.
And well, yeah. Gavin is over there, so go talk to him.
Yeah, and I guess I would add also that a good way of spreading it among the staff is you can gather people who are interested and show them. You know, take a spreadsheet, do something with you know, sort and filter, and do a few useful things with a spreadsheet, and those who get it will start seeing it and they'll want to learn more. I don't believe that every journalist in the newsroom is going to do this. That's sort of a pipe dream. But finding the ones who might get turned on by it is probably a good way.
And, well, Steve, Aaron, and I have all been either employees of, board members of, or both at investigative reporters and editors in the States. And there's a lot of training material that you can get from that organization, especially on computer-assisted reporting. And I think that the brown bag lunch approach really is the way to go in some cases, where you can show people, here's the story and here's how we did it. Now, don't you want to do it too?
The only thing I would add is never underestimate the importance of lying to your boss. So when I started doing this, I was, you know, how can you do this? And you always, oh, it won't take any extra time, it'll be fine. Yeah, so I had to completely pretend that I could do it all in my spare time. And then when we started producing stuff, nobody asked that question anymore.
We have a couple more questions there, and 10 minutes to go, so.
Yes. I have a question about quality. How do you tackle the question of quality when you have numbers? Do you use the same kind of approach that you have with non-quantitative sources? Because you can lie with numbers in a different way that you can lie with words. And do you envisage kind of a different approach, because you have a different degree of responsibility with numbers, but at the end it's all information, actually using numbers to do information. Not all data are good data, not all sources are good sources, but some confidential sources can be employed, but not all, let's say, data which are not correct and good can be used the same way. So do you have the same, do you use the same, like, say, professional approach, or you, when faced with not very good data, or you have one for quantitative sources and another one for non-quantitative sources?
I'll take that one on for a minute. My preferred approach to doing this kind of work is doing what I call working from the bottom up rather than the top down. And what I mean by that is starting with things like what Simon was starting with, individual cases, and counting them up the way that you think they ought to be counted up, so that you understand the process that went into each of those numbers better than if you got statistics, official statistics from somewhere, and you could never go interview anybody with that statistic. So one way to help the quality control is to do this idea of going from the lab to the field, back to the lab, back to the field. And that's very difficult to do when you start with a statistical number. It's much easier to do if you are counting things.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of quick things. We worked on a project 2 years ago with a reporter named Charles Duhigg. It's called Toxic Waters. And we originally came in with the intention of doing public-facing web applications to kind of enhance his reporting online. And it became very clear that the data itself was part of the story. It was so bad, it was so incomplete that you know, the agency that was charged with overseeing the quality of drinking water, not only was it incomplete, there was simply no way, based on the quality of the data, that they could even do their job that they are mandated to do. So that actually became a line of reporting for Charles, just based on that alone. So you might say, okay, we have a data set that's terrible, it's incorrect, it's incomplete, it's messy, it's dirty, and you say, well, we don't have a story. Well, no, actually you do. It's just not the story necessarily that you went into it with. That's kind of number one. And number two is, for whatever reason, and I totally understand this because I've been there myself, journalists are loath to admit what they don't know. You know, they like to take this voice of God approach to everything, the all-knowing, all-seeing journalist, and just simply being able to say and admit, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what the data says, here's what we can't infer from this because we don't know. That's okay. With almost every computer-assisted reporting, significant story that I did, and Sarah, I'm sure, and well, I know, and Steve, you know, you run in the paper or online what we used to refer to as the nerd box, which would tell you, you know, all the details about what we did, our methodology. And online now, you can even, you know, release the data, the raw data that you used to sort of allow others to either extend what you've done or to fact check you. ProPublica does this all the time, and we are not as good about it as we should be. Toxic Waters, we did release the data we used, and other news organizations picked up on it. But just because you have terrible data doesn't mean you don't have a story. I mean, data is a source, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to monopolize this, but data is a source. And people assume, well, it's data, so it must be perfect, and if it's not perfect, it's unusable. Wrong, completely wrong. You know, human sources don't always tell you everything. Human sources lie to you. Human sources obscure things. Human sources have motivations, too, that aren't necessarily right at the surface. It's just another source for doing reporting. So I think of it that way, I would say.
I'll add one other thing. The nice thing about data is you can more readily discover flaws in it. When a human source tells you something, it may be really hard to find the error in it. But the nice thing about data, you can do some frequency tables and see how messy it is. You can very quickly produce averages and then see if those averages measure up to what you think it should measure, and so on. So even though data can be messy and unclear and wrong, I think it's easier to peel it back and see where the errors are.
And I'll just add one last thing. I don't want to monopolize this either, but the idea that we're reporting on them, not repeating them. And, you know, we're not stenographers taking down numbers, no matter whether you're in any role of any of the people on this panel. We're going to be reporting on them and figuring out what went into them and whether we think they have value. And that reporting step just can't be skipped. You just can't go from, you know, official to publication without some kind of ability to understand what they mean.
Yeah, can I
Go
just
ahead.
add, just very briefly? Yeah, I think you can use it in a scientific way. Like, you should just really deconstruct exactly as you do with every other type of scientific work. And the other thing is that you have to have a statistician as a friend, which helps a lot. And I think when I was looking at the data for the school, to have a person helping me to understand how they're raised, so then I can go and talk to the people, for example, at a local level, to explain the entire process of collection, that makes a huge difference, because once I know how the data is going to be collected and how the data set is going to be constructed, I understand much more of, you know, the significance of the data.
The only thing I was going to say is that, well, two things really, that journalists traditionally have had this kind of reluctance to challenge numbers in the way that they would challenge a source, right? So you've got amazing journalists who would meet a source in a pub and really kind of interrogate them. But as soon as they're presented with some numbers, they kind of accept them. So I think that is changing. And what we find also, because obviously we publish the data behind everything we do, and if you come up with something and it's not right, people will jump on you like a ton of bricks within minutes. And that's this amazing kind of community that's out there who just know stuff and can see when something's not right. So I kind of think, if you publish and you're open, then you can't be wrong in that sense, because somebody will tell you, but you have to involve them and kind of integrate that into the process.
Okay. We have 3 more minutes, so let's use them well, and let's throw us a nice question there. The last one on quality was phenomenal. It got us going. Okay, so if you have no more questions, I'll just remind you, we'll be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow with Aaron and Simon again, and with Dan Nguyen and Mirko Lorenz. Dan Nguyen was mentioned earlier from ProPublica. He has done excellent work as the Dollar for Docs, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow. And Mirko Lorenz from Deutsche Welle, who's here and will be telling us about information architecture. I invite you to look at the program and see where our speakers are in more panels, because they will get deeper into the subjects they touched on today. Thank you very much.
And I'll just mention also that Sarah and I will be doing a hands-on workshop on precision journalism at 2 o'clock in Hotel San Gallo. I think some of you have already signed up for it. So if you're those, we look forward to seeing you.